Hi.
Hi, kiddo.
Hi, Dia.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to do this and so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, well, likewise. I feel like you're a legend celebrity, all on your own.
Oh, stop. I'm so excited that first Phil and now you would want to actually talk to me and us, the other
Yeah, of
fans,
course.
because everyone was so excited and sent so many questions. I don't know if you saw the list of questions. I was like, I feel embarrassed to even send this to you. So many questions. We don't have to go through all of them, but
That's all right. We can get through what we can get through.
yeah. Should we just get into it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. Amazing. So, first, what I would like for you to describe is your job. What do you do? Because it's like a showrunner, right? Like all of this, they seem like such big words that people don't necessarily even understand what it can mean. So, what does it
Right.
mean? Like, what is your job? What do you do?
Well, a showrunner is someone who is really in charge of kind of all aspects of the show at the end of the day. They're overseeing the writer's room, making sure that the scripts are as good as they could possibly be, that they're being churned out on time. And then they are also overseeing production. So they are, the one that any production issues are addressed to the showrunner, and the showrunner has to help problem solve with line producers and such. They're also making sure that the show is producible and making changes that production needs in order to get the thing shot on time and on budget. And then they're also overseeing post-production, so sitting in on edits,
Yeah.
watching cuts, giving notes, and then being in these editorial sessions, and then all the way through VFX and sound mix and music and everything. So it's a big job. For this show, I shared that with Phil. So Phil and I, ended up co-running. It made it all much more manageable. It's a really hard job to do on your own, and a lot of people do it on their own. I highly recommend to anyone who's in a position to have a co-runner to get one, because it really helps spread the burden. Phil and I both have families. We have a lot of responsibilities to our households, and it was just great that there were things that I'd be like, "Hey Phil, I can't make this," and he would make it. And then likewise, he's like, "Keto, I can't do this. Can you do it?" And we just divided and conquered. And a lot of things we did together, but a lot of things, we were able to sort of separate and manage the show in that aspect. So showrunner is a very big job, but again, if you can draw on managerial experience, it's not a very it's creative in a lot of ways, but it's also not creative in a lot of ways. It's really
Yeah.
about being a good manager and a
Yeah.
good people person, and someone who can really understand the needs of the departments that they're overseeing, so that they can give them the information, give them, the materials, and then move on to what other responsibility they have, as opposed to getting like bogged down in one area, and then suddenly these other areas are left, needing your attention and not getting it until late at night or something. So it's a lot of a sort of moving around, being nimble, and really knowing when you're needed and knowing when you're not needed, is sort of a good way to understand the job in its entirety. But also, yeah, to be really good with people, to be a good listener, to be a good problem solver, and to be really good at cooperating with lots of other people, because it's not a position you can do siloed off. It's a position that requires you to really be able to dig in with other people and put your heads together and try together to make the best show
Yeah.
possible.
Do you have a part of the production if you're doing like writing, then if you're on set sometimes, and then post production and all this stuff? Do you have a spot or a room or a place where you feel like the most at home? Is the writer's room like where you're like
Writers'
with
room.
people?
The
Yeah.
writers' room is definitely where I feel the most at home. I love working with writers. I love blue skying. I love how, the wild imagination of all these people coming together to, come up with the most compelling and fun story possible. So I loved being in the writer's room, and I loved pushing story and getting these wonderful ideas onto paper. I also really like post-production. It can be a very grueling process, but that's the final draft of the script, you know, and I love editors. I love working with editors, and it's a really magical part of the process because you really see, you know, how sometimes you really have to reshape a scene and it's so different from what you originally thought, but you find something even better, you know, in that process. So
Yeah.
It's a pretty fascinating part of the whole birthing of an episode, and I really do enjoy it, even though it takes a lot of time and can be really hard.
Yes, fair. That's so cool. I just love, because I work on TV myself, and it's just so
Mhm.
cool to hear about all this like behind the scenes stuff and how all the different parts work in different shows. That's
Yeah.
so cool. How did you become a part of the show? Like, when did you hear about Legends?
Yeah, I was on the Arrow. So I came into the Berlanti verse on Arrow season 2, and I was there for 3 years. That's a typical length of a writer's contract, is 3 years. So my contract was up at Arrow, and I was pregnant at the time. So I knew I wanted to be in a job where I felt safe and supported. And Arrow was a wonderful place to work. And Wendy and Mark were co-running at the time, and they were just like, "Keto, we love you. We would love you to stay." But Mark was like, "But we have a need over at Legends for season 2 if you would consider hopping over." And I did consider it. Legends had been going simultaneously along with us, and we're all down the hall from one another. So
Yeah.
I knew like most of the writers on the staff already. Hadn't worked with Phil yet, but we would see each other on our walks, and like, you know, I knew he was a good guy, and
Yeah.
I just was like, yeah, I would like to hop over, but I would like to be made a co-executive producer on that show and lead the writers' room. And Mark sort of took that in, and he said, "That's a great idea." And it was largely because there was kind of nowhere for me to grow at Arrow. Like, Beth Schwartz was already sort of the future leader, and I did not want at all to get in her way or to feel I was like, no, this show is for Beth, like 100%. I want her to run it, but I did want to keep growing. You know, I wanted to challenge myself and to gain more responsibility. So it was a really great move for me to go to this other show that kind of needed that. So I came in and started running the room as a new mom, and it was great. It was so wonderful. And Phil and Mark, who are co-running that show at the time, were just so wonderfully nurturing and really let me get all this responsibility, but also an education. You know, I spent that time with that added responsibility of like pushing the room, but also getting to learn more about what they did, so that by the time I did become a co-showrunner officially, after sort of unofficially doing the job for a couple of years, I was ready, you know, and I was ready, and I knew what I was jumping into.
Yeah. That's cool. How was the transition from Arrow? Because it's a very different show, or I don't know if you felt like it was a very different show, or like what was the transition?
Oh, very,
Yeah.
very different. You know, Arrow was, you know, a much more serious, much more intense show, very, very emotional and very soapy, but really with this sort of like, there's a darkness around it. And I was raised on Batman comics. I adore Batman. And so going into Arrow, I was like super excited. I was like, it's Batman with a bow. Like, this is great. But I realized that I also kind of always had this compulsion to want to undercut him, to add more humor, to sort of poke fun at the genre a little bit more than Arrow had space for.
Yeah, sure.
And so moving over to Legends was great because like Phil was all about taking the piss out of the genre. He was like, yes, the more we can subvert, the more we can poke fun, the more like that's the show he wanted to make. And so through season 2, you know, which started out pretty serious, but certainly had more of that fun time travel element, had, you know, suddenly had more, you know, just it was lighter as we jumped into season 2, and that was on purpose. That was as a reaction to like season 1. There were things that didn't work. Let's move in this direction. We got to have more fun, and then there was that episode that I co-wrote with Chris Vidak where we just were like, okay, we're turning over a new leaf for the show, and that was episode 9 of season 2, Raiders of the Lost Art, where we had this crazy idea, and we were like, I don't know, is it going to fly? I feel like this is where our show is going, but is it? And we kind of soft pitched it to Greg Berlanti, and he just kind of looked at the board and was like, yeah, do it. Sure. You know, I know we were like, oh. And so we got to do this crazy thing with George Lucas and how it affected, you know, Ray and Nate, and this crazy action sequence in a dump. And like just got to do that, just totally go nuts with it. And it was so fun. And it really,
such a good episode.
That was a big turning point for the show, because then we were like, we can do more stories like this. We can really have fun and like really, really subvert this very familiar genre and kind of be the weirdos of the Berlantiverse. And yeah, and when we never stopped, obviously.
Yeah. Do you have, oh, that's such a good episode. Do you have moments on the show as a whole that to you are the weirdest, or like stuff that you're like, I can't believe we got to do that? Obviously it gets crazier towards
so many. There were so many. I do think that like obviously there's the famous introduction of Bebo, which was based on we were actually breaking a whole other episode. We were breaking an episode with ABBA, where ABBA's demo for Waterloo got trapped in Waterloo times, you know, and Napoleon got his hand on it and heard it and realized that he was going to lose. It was like a whole thing. We had this whole episode. It was a really fun episode, and then ABBA didn't want to participate.
Yeah, Phil mentioned this. I was like, how did ABBA not want to do it?
How did they didn't want to do it? And so suddenly we were like, you know, we had broken this episode, and suddenly we had to come up with a whole new episode on the fly. And I was just like, okay, let's do Gods Must Be Crazy with Vikings and a Tickle Me Elmo doll. And that became the Bebo episode. And that's and when the studio and the network like read those story areas and were like, okay, you know, we were again like, okay, this is happening. Like, we're doing it. And then there were more episodes that continued to get crazier and crazier. I think like one of the episodes that I thought was really, really nuts was Legends of Tim Meow Meow, which I think was in season 4. That was just so weird, wacky, because we had all these like differing timelines and versions of our cast, and keeping track of it all was really complicated. I think we almost broke Ray and James, who co-wrote that episode. James especially was like, at one point he was just had his head in his hands. He was like, I don't understand what's happening. And we had to just sit there. We're like, okay, in this timeline, this is what happened, and that is why they are this way. And it was just like, it was so much to keep track of. But the episode worked. It was so nuts and fun and like, just so crazy. So I'm really proud of that one. I don't know. It's just our show went to so many bizarre places and did so with its heart on its sleeve, which was really important always, that we weren't doing something crazy just to be crazy. It was always because there was an emotional story behind it that was very real. And then the genre and the plot and the twists and turns were all in service of that. You know, we were always really careful not to just be nuts to be nuts. So, but it always did challenge us to say like, what's the like offbeat way of doing this climax? And that is kind of how we brought Bebo back in that season, was like, we knew we were going to do some sort of Voltron, like combining of powers, and that was going to save the day. But like, how do you do that in the like not Care Bear stairway where people are just holding hands and like, you know, we're like, what, how do we make that us? How do we do that? And that's where we're like, they create an avatar of Bebo. Like, it just made sense. I was like, that made sense, and it worked. And again, the studio network were like, do it. You know? So
because that's the thing. That's what I always say. I said that to Phil. I've said that to everyone. I'm like, somehow the show, the ideas are like insane, and it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it works so well every time. Like, somehow I think it's the balance that you just talked about, where it's like there's the heart and then the craziness, and they both work together and they don't take away from each other.
Yeah.
So good. Do you have favorite characters to write for? or are they all your favorite?
Lots. I tend to really have a soft spot for villains. I really like villainous characters and
Cool.
sort of finding their underbelly, their soft underbelly. That's always like a fun challenge for me. I loved writing the Darks. I loved writing Damien and Nora a lot. And I really loved Astra. I even loved Bishop. I think he was a really twisted villain, but there was a wound there that I thought was really interesting. And McRory was always fun to write, that have that sort of gruff character, sort of taking the piss out of everybody.
Yeah.
Constantine, Gary, I don't know. They were all fun to write. Ava, because she was so, buttoned up but so sensitive too. Like, I don't know. Everyone was fun.
Yeah. Are there scenes or lines or moments or things that you can think of that turned out different that you thought when you were writing them, or when they were still in the writing room like stage, and then you see them in the editing room or in the episode that you're like, oh, this is not what we thought, but this is better or different or somehow,
Oh, that's a really good question. When we did the X Factor episode in season 6, I think it was, where we did the future. That was an episode that really gave people some butterflies. They were a little worried because it was supposed to be, like futuristic LA. And then when you get, the dailies and you're looking at this footage, you're like, it just looks like Vancouver. You're like, oh God, like, what are we? Oh no, like, how are we going to make this flashy and fun? And like, all these things that we sort of promised when we sold this episode to the studio and network. And there was a lot of like, feelings as we were putting it together and all that. And I was the one who was sort of overseeing the VFX at that point. So I was just like, don't worry, it's going to be awesome. We're going to sex it up. Don't worry. But there was still like a lot of nervousness as people were watching these cuts. They're like, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, they were so nervous. And then lo and behold, as like, I was going through the VFX and I was like, more neon, more sparkles, more, like, I was just telling like our VFX team, just like fill the frame with like flashing lights and exploding bulbs, like just fill the frame with like lights and and make it feel futuristic, and it totally worked. By the time the episode came out, everyone was like, oh phew, that was great. And I was like, yeah, it's called VFX and it's a whole other part of this process, and we can fix it. But it was a challenge because also it was like prime COVID time, and it was like everyone was so nervous. We could not use a lot of extras. We could not so it always, you had this challenge of like, there aren't enough people, there's not enough filling this frame. And thankfully we were able to just throw a lot of VFX money in it and fill it with lots of sparkles and lights and sort of ignore the fact that there are only like 10 people.
That's fair. Do you always know, or like now that you've done VFX, do you always know when you see a scene and people are like, this is missing stuff? Do you know that the stuff that we can do and the stuff that we can't do?
I mean, we have a really amazing post team, and they were always on top of things like that. If something came in and they're like, that's going to be a problem, it would immediately be flagged. It would immediately be sort of like integrated in the budget. And then it would immediately be talked about when we were in post. They're like, we understand that this might not work, but here's what we can do, and they would immediately start pitching us ideas if there was something they knew was not going to fly. The people on our post team were such big fans of the show that they always knew like when something wasn't going to sit right with us, and how start problem solving ways that they can help us out.
Can you think of any stuff? Because I'm just picturing you guys in the writer's room and then just throwing ideas and, someone being like, oh, that was such a good idea and let's run with that. Do you have memories of times when you heard someone else say an idea that you were like, oh, that's good, I'm glad we hired that person? Or like,
always, constantly. We had so many talented writers on our staff. And I feel like they were constantly giving insights and ideas that made the show so much better. It's really hard for me to pinpoint.
Or moments in the writer's room where you're like, everyone is like, this is great.
I don't know. I mean, that happened kind of every episode. It always seemed like there was a moment where things would really come together and everybody would be firing great ideas to sort of, make these things work. There were a lot of really brilliant writers who always came in with their A game.
Yeah. We love the writers.
They're one.
Yeah. I think it's so cool how the fans really actually are like fans of the writers too, and give a lot of credit to the writers, because this show is so crazy that it's like all thanks to the writers in many ways. So that's very cool. How does the writing process work? Like, do you all together break the episode, and how do you choose who writes which episode and who writes together, and like how does
it's kind of always a revolving puzzle. We break everything together. There's sort of a 2-week process. During week 1, we're sort of coming up with the broader storylines, the emotional stories, the genre, the big plot moves, sort of act by act. And we are then creating a story document that we're presenting to the studio and network. And the story document it's basically like a little pitch of like a 4 or 5 page document that's like, this is what's going to happen in this episode.
Yeah.
Who's having an emotional journey. Here's the inciting incident. Here's what happens. Here's how these stories are all broken out. And here's how it all comes together at the end. So we create that document. We give it to the studio and network. They then give us our notes while we are the next week breaking down the episode into scenes and acts.
Right.
On a board. And we're doing that all together. And then once that is a fully broken episode, meaning every scene has been boarded and talked about extensively. And at that point, we've already picked the writers. Like the writers are usually picked partway through, around the time we submit the story document, we're like, you guys are writing this episode. And again, who writes the episode is determined by a lot of factors. There's sometimes a hierarchy where it's like, it's the first episode. So, Phil or I will be on it, or it's the finale. So Phil or I will be on it, or both of us will be on it.
Yeah.
But largely in between, it's sort of like we want to make sure we have some upper levels still in the room, that we're pairing, if there's a writer who hasn't written a lot of episodes, we're pairing them with someone who's written a lot of episodes so that that the experience is melded. Or it's like, this is a super humorous episode, so we're going to get one of our really comedic writers on it. Or if there's like a genre that like we know someone is a diehard fan of, then we're going to put that writer on it. So we try to play to people's strengths as much as possible, but also recognizing that like we need a certain type of group in the room to keep pushing story forward, because we are always on such a tight schedule. And we want to make sure that we have people who are really experienced pitchers, helping to keep the conversation going. But yeah, a lot of different things go into who writes which episode.
Yeah. How do ideas come? Do they usually come in the room with the other writers, or do you just walk on the street and you're like, oh my gosh, we need to
It's a mix. Sometimes, often things are coming to me because I'm having a conversation with other writers and something sparks and I'm like, oh, what if we did that? Or likewise, other writers have the same effect. They're hearing us talking and they're like, what if we did it this way? And whoa, that's great. There have been definitely times where I've had ideas outside of the room that I then come in and I'm like, what about this? And then, and then we were off to the races. Like the introduction to Booster Gold was something that I thought up of while that was like a shower moment. And it was because my husband is like obsessed with 90s hip hop, and we listened to like 90s on 9 in the car, like all the time. And, it wasn't a shower moment. I guess it was a driving moment. We had dropped off our kids and we were listening to 90s on 9. And I just had this visual in my head of Booster Gold freezing time and like dancing through a war zone, like listening to 90s hip hop. And then I pitched it to the room and Phil was like, I love that, but what if he was playing golf? So we're like, okay, great. And so then it became our introduction to Booster Gold with him freezing time playing golf, listening to 90s hip hop.
That's such a good scene. I remember because we knew that he would be on the show because, it was announced before. So then the whole episode, I'm just waiting, like, when is it happening? When is it happening? And that scene, it's so freaking good. It looks so good.
Looked amazing. Yeah.
Great song.
Mark did an incredible job on that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Besides that, do you have favorite like character introductions the first time we meet a new character? Because
Ooh.
that is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much love how we've introduced every new character on
Yeah.
the scene. Like Zari was great, like her conning the legends and stealing their like that's so brilliant. Like
Yeah.
she's so cool. I loved how we brought in Spooner. Like again, her like I always love when a new character comes in and kind of highlights the weakness of the team,
Yeah.
comes in and is like, you guys are kind of full of shit. You guys are kind of like, you don't know what you're doing,
Not
and comes
wrong.
in and sort of like, I just love that. So Spooner was really good like that. I love that Astra started out as our villain. Again, I have such a soft spot for villains. I love taking baddies and finding the ooey gooey center. So I loved writing her as a scary villain, and then I've also loved writing her as like a really sensitive and kind friend. Who else? I don't know. Bishop was a fun person to introduce,
Yes.
especially when we learn like how he's connected to Ava. And New Gideon, like human Gideon, like that intro of her like being so confused and being like just unable to communicate at first, and I just love that, and her journey as like learning about being a human being was really fun to do.
Yeah. It was so nice to have Amy on the screen so we can actually see her.
I know, she's
Yeah.
so talented. We love her so much.
She's the best. Okay, one of my favorite things about this show is the episode titles.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite episode title that like comes to mind right away, or and how is the process like for that? I think they just
I
kept
mean,
getting weirder and weirder and better like
yeah,
towards the end.
I've really liked guest starring John Noble because we were so proud that we got John Noble in the flesh to be on our show, because he'd been doing the voice of Malice and like loved him. And I'm, how crazy I am about Lord of the Rings. So getting to like, again, poke fun at my favorite movie trilogy was
Yeah.
was really cool. And just that we had him for that little scene, like just it was such a huge deal that we were just like, we're just calling the episode guest starring John Noble, because like we are so beyond the moon that we got this guy to do this silly little scene. And then I really liked Swan Thong
Yes.
as a title, because it was so perfect, and we had gone through so many potential, like we had this massive list on our
We've
whiteboard.
seen the list, right? Someone posted
I posted it.
Yes.
And I was just like, there were so many. And then Mark Bruner, who was, I think had been new that year, was just like Swan Thong. And I was just like, boom, mic drop moment. That's it. That's it. Get rid of the list. That's it. Like it was like, boom, that was perfect.
So good. So good. And one of my favorites also has to be the 100th.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to say that, but like it's just I remember when I saw it, I was like,
error. Yeah.
I was just showing it to people who don't watch this show, who don't care. I was like, look at the episode title of this 100th.
I felt so bad for like our script coordinator and like our legal department, because they have to like track episode titles for payments and like like all the contracts for the writers, and I was just like, sorry guys, we just gave you a really hard one to keep track of.
Yeah. Okay. Scenes that made you cry or laugh the most.
Oh goodness, I laughed a lot in this show.
Yes, same.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there was a lot of belly laughter in Legends of Meow Meow. A lot of laughter in Lowest Common Demoninator. That so funny. So funny. And our cast just nailed it. Like they were so into it and they did such a great job. I mean the Bebo fighting Malice is great.
Mm-hmm.
I loved, oh God, there were so many funny moments.
And sad moment, like the crying moment.
Oh yeah, the crying. Ooh, okay. So I cried quite a bit in season 6. There Will Be Brood. Oh my God, that episode it was like these beautiful scenes between Spooner and her mom and Astra, and they were so moving. Yeah. I feel like even like I watched the dailies and I cried. I watched the cut and I cried. I watched, like, it's just every time I had to watch these scenes, I would just be wiping tears away. They were so moving. I don't know. There were a lot of very emotional moments.
Yeah.
I think I cried watching Knocked Up, Knocked Down, or Knocked Down, Knocked Up, because I knew it was going to be my last episode, and it was just emotional. It was just emotional to know that I was saying goodbye to the show.
Oh, you knew at that point already that you were going to be done?
Yeah, my contract was up after season 7, and I was already planning on moving on. I was hoping that I was leaving the show and with the best possible chances of getting renewed, and obviously that was incorrect. But that was I was going to leave, and Phil was going to be well, his contract was up too, but he was planning on staying.
Yeah, right. I had some really great questions from other fans. A lot of them. A lot of them were similar questions. One that came up the most was like talking about season 8 and what were the plans for season 8, and if you could do more, what would you want to do more? But I don't know if you can talk to that at all, or like,
I mean,
but
there were loose plans, but it was so they were going to be in jail, and then they were going to have to go to basically time school. So they were going to be kind of like in sort of a time university with all these like young people who, again, seemed like much more competent than all of them. And so you're going to have this sort of like old school vibe with our older legends, now the old fogies on campus. So we're going to do something kind of like that. And then obviously there was stuff with the baby and, them being new parents and also being in this school.
Did you have, that was also a question that came up a few times. Did you have a name picked for the Avalanche child?
We did not at all have a name. It probably would have been carefully deliberated over by all the writers, but we never settled on a name. We didn't even settle on a gender. Like yes, there was the little girl in that thing, but things changed, like now that they know that there could have been a little, suddenly they could have a little boy. So that, like, hadn't even settled on that.
Yeah. Has there ever been ideas that were too crazy, even for Legends, that you haven't done, that you're like, I don't think we can do that?
I mean, usually it wasn't about too crazy. It was usually just like too expensive or too hard. Like, going to ancient Egypt, like, it's not going to happen. Like being in Antarctica for an extended appearance, like the Shackleton episode. It's like, no, it's not going to, we were able to do it sort of with Nip Stuck. But it was like we were mostly inside the Wave Rider. We had some snow coming in. Yeah. And then like we had the one big VFX shot of them bursting out of the snow. But like we couldn't actually just be in snowy covered, tundra for an episode. It was usually like, just like really unproducible things like that were the things that we had to say no to. Because otherwise it was like, anything was fair game. We went to the moon, like we went all over the place. So it was usually not about like, this is too nuts. It was usually just like, we can't afford it.
That's fair. Because I'm like, I don't know if there would be, after everything we've seen, would there be anything that's
I don't think so. I don't think anything would be off limits. Again, as long as it was in service of like, character stories that were compelling. But the obstacle would just be how can we do this thing? Is it at all possible?
Yeah. Then I had a few like more specific ones about like specific characters. Like Ali was asking about, did Matt help with the creation of Quinn, or who came up with the idea for him? It's such a different character, or who, like, how does that process work? And do you include the actors?
Yeah, well, Matt was a great collaborator for Gwyn as we were talking about him. We knew that we wanted a character who was 180 degrees away from Constantine in terms of confidence and self-assuredness and the way he spoke and the way he walked and the way, just all and his backstory. We just wanted to make sure this was a very, very different kind of person, similar to what we did with Charlie and Amaya. I think as we started talking about him in very broad terms, we talked to Matt, and Matt got excited, and Matt had some ideas on like how he would sort of personify these things, and that in turn gave us more ideas on conversations this character could have, or sort of how we'd sort of get him to open up to our team as being essentially the team's grandfather in terms of like the era. I mean, great grandfather technically, yes. But like that was sort of the dynamic we wanted to play with, was that like now great grandpa is like hanging out with these youngins, and there's going to be this like intergenerational struggle, but also a lot of love and warmth, as these people got closer. That was a lot of what we were playing with him. And he was so excited about it. Like, he was just like, of course, that makes perfect sense. And like, I could be like this, or I could, he's such a wonderful, creative person. And he always is down for like any sort of challenge, as long as it feels really rooted in like, an emotional truth. So he was great.
Yeah. And another one that I got in like really late, right before this, about Ava becoming more and more like Jess every season. So how do you guys like, when you write the characters and then you meet the actor and then you collaborate with them, do you like intentionally do that, or like think about it that you're like, oh, this makes more sense?
Yeah, it was a wonderful process with Jess, because she was brought in to initially be this foil for Sarah, for Katie's character, and to really be that like, buttoned up by the book, like real. But we loved the tension that Jess brought to it, being someone who was naturally silly and exuberant and just such a fun person to be around. And that brought so much, just a great dynamic in the way she played that buttoned up, straight-laced character, because you knew there was something under there that was just trying to get out. And it was really fun in the progression of their relationship and how they both rubbed off on each other, to see how Ava was able to let loose more and more. And when she really let loose, she really let loose. You really just saw that like naturally bubbly and fun person who was sort of underneath all of that stodginess. And realizing that characterization was entirely incorrect. Like, yes, she was always a type A person and she liked being organized and all that stuff, but the notion that she was like boss Ava and that was like the only thing she was supposed to be was just which is entirely wrong. And we were trying to say that basically like what you're born into is not at all what you are meant to be, if that's not what feels right, and that you don't have to be shackled to whatever definition was put on you when you were born or created, in her case.
Yeah, it is such a nice journey to watch, especially now, because we're doing, I'm doing like a rewatch thing of Legends. So we started from season 1 and we're watching 2 episodes every week, and then I'm doing an Instagram live, and then we talk about it with the fans. And
I love it. That's great.
It's so fun, and we're in season 2 now, but I can't wait to get go through the whole thing and see it all from the beginning, and then talk.
Oh man, I feel like I need to do that. I haven't there's some episodes I watched once, like in the editing bay, and then was like maybe missed it when it came out live. I have the DVDs. They're like, and I just haven't sat down to rewatch my own show.
Yeah, it's really good.
I hear it's good. I hear people like it.
Yeah, people love it. Okay, this was a great question, I thought, from Allie. Were all the character relationships, friendship or romantic, predetermined, or were some created because cast members had great chemistry?
Oh yeah, it was sort of both. I mean, I think we always plan to have a character go from being very closed off and unwilling to connect emotionally with anybody on our team to becoming part of the family. That's always the general journey that a new character goes on in their first season with the crew. But it was always kind of a discovery to see who really brought them out of their shell. Yeah, we often didn't plan who that would be. It was usually a discovery. So for instance, like Spooner and Astra was kind of a discovery. Like we didn't realize, and we didn't plan at the beginning, like, oh, and she's going to become really good friends with Astra, and they're going to connect up over their moms. And, but, you know, like it just sort of came to be, and it ended up feeling really natural because the two actresses also became such good friends. So there was that natural chemistry, but then, yeah, it made sense. Like, oh yeah, there is this, like, this similar wound that these two women have, and they started having all this tension, but then when they started peeling away and recognizing that they had a similar trauma, they became closer. And yeah, it was largely just seeing them, two of them, in scenes together and realizing, like, these two odd ducks, like, seems like they're actually gonna really help bring each other out, and it worked out really wonderfully. But yeah, I think there are always sort of connections like that. Like Nate and Zari, we didn't really see coming. It was, you know, we knew that, we thought Zari was going to be really a lot closer to Ray, you know, and that was sort of what we had set up initially, was that, like, Ray was going to be the one to really bring her out of her shell, and in a lot of ways he did. But then we just saw this, like, wonderful friendship between Zari and Nate that just felt so natural and so laid back, and then when we got the opportunities to, like, deepen that and make it more of a romance, you know, that was a surprise. We really didn't think that would happen, and then suddenly it made perfect sense because of how the kind of character that Zari was. She would never be in a meaningful relationship with someone who wasn't a friend first. Like, that just, there was no way that she would ever trust somebody that much who she didn't know had her back no matter what, romance or no romance. So when we were sort of just toying with it, it was like, actually, that makes sense for her. You know, it seems like that's something she would actually dive into. And of course, Nate, with his, like, string of doomed romances, it seemed like inevitable that this girl not from his time, and not, you know, eventually not from his own timeline, would be someone he just falls madly in love with.
And moves into a totem with.
Yes, he moves into a totem with.
And that's why it was so nice to see the Nate with 2.0 as well, and how that was such a different.
It was, again, it was a friendship. But it never had that tension of, like, him thinking, like, well, she is like my Zari. No, he was like, no, my Zari is my Zari. Because she's a totally different person, which is why I love her. And this Zari is also wonderful, and I love her as a friend, but we don't have that same connection, you know?
Do you have characters? That was someone's question as well. Do you have characters you wish that they would have been introduced sooner, so we would have had more of them, or they would have fit in a season, like, and a theme from before? Or are we just happy with the way that it is?
I'm kind of happy with the way things rolled out. I mean, I do think it might have been fun to have a human Gideon spend more than, like, one episode a season with us, because it was always fun when she would pop in for whatever reason. But I don't know. I feel like that was a character that could have had a couple seasons of human growth, and not just sort of the one.
Okay, this is now talking about the campaign that's been going on. I don't know how much of you have seen. Like, to Phil, I was like, I don't know if I need to, like, explain to you. I'm like, I'm sure you know something, but because he's not on social media, so. But have you had favorite stunts or moments from that?
Well, the planes have been really dramatic, and I've loved
legends.
And the billboards, especially seeing, like, billboards pop up all over the world. It's like that. It was so moving to see that people were that devoted and you know, passionate about the show, that they would do that. Like, I just thought it was really meaningful.
It's been fun to see what everyone comes up with.
And the videos, there've been a lot of really sweet, like, tribute videos up there that have been really nice.
That's kind of it. But one final question: do you have a moment on the show that you're most proud of, or now that you look back and you're like, I'm really glad I was a part of this, or even, like, behind the scenes stuff? That was also one of my questions, like, favorite behind the scenes stuff, like from the writer's room or from set, or, like, moments that you look back on now and your time on Legends that you're like, that was a good time.
It was a good time. I mean, I can say that wholeheartedly about the whole show. Again, I'm really excited and proud of everything we were able to do. The fact that we were able to take such big swings I liked that, in season 3, we were able to bring in this mythology that I had come up with for the Vixen animated movie that I wrote with Mark Guggenheim. This whole thing with the totems was something again, that was like a shower moment where I was like, what if her spirit totem was just one of many? And, they all were part of this sort of like Fifth Element like mythology that, goes back to ancient Africa. And then when we got to bring that into the show and even got to go to Zambesi and things like that, that was really cool. I'm really glad we got to do that with Amaya's character before she had to leave. I'm really proud of, the magical creature season. I thought was really cool, and that we got to do all these different genres and meet all these magical creatures. Because I've always wanted to do like a magical creature sort of procedural. Like that's like a Monster of the Week show is like on my top list of kinds of shows I want to do. And it was really fun to do that. And the fact that we did it often with practical effects, we did as much as we could using makeup and special effects. That's something I'm really proud of. I really liked that we did an episode about the creator of Godzilla. I know it was sort of buried under like a hijinks during Thanksgiving episode too. They were sort of smashed together, but it meant a lot to me that I got to have that character on the show and talk about, even just briefly, the effects of like nuclear war on this person, and how, the trauma of witnessing nuclear war is what birthed this incredible character, this monster, even though it's, again, sort of buried amongst a lot of hijinks and craziness like that. I'm really glad that I got to put that out there.
That was, you wrote that, right? That episode. I
wrote that with Oba. Again, we were able to do so many crazy things, and I'm really proud that we were able to, and that it was blessed, and then it was expected, it was just, there's a lot of good stuff.
There is. And now, like, we'll just keep rewatching and, who knows what happens, like, in the future, or I don't know. I feel like people are very hopeful for one day to, to see something.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it has been a great ride. It's fun to talk to other fans, because I feel like people who get the show really get the show and they love the show. And there's so many like big themes and topics that are so important to many people, including me, that amongst all the craziness, like you said, there's like these moments that are really big for fans. So
well, I was really happy that like kind of at the last minute we were able to put an asexual character on TV, and I was hoping that we'd have more seasons to explore what that meant and how does she go through a relationship with that identity, because it happens and people have wonderfully meaningful relationships being asexual. It's like, what is that like? I would love to have seen it on TV. And it was kind of a bummer that we didn't get to, but
even the fact that we had that was huge. Even because back when we were still having actual episodes go on TV every week, I did lives every week after the episode to talk about those episodes. And I remember after that episode and we did the live, there was at least 2 people in the live who like told their story and that they are ace, and how huge it was for them to see that. They were all like, this is Legends, this show has everything, and now they also have this. Like, it's
another thing is I'm really proud of the Muslim representation on our show. Really proud of that, especially because I remember when we were in initial discussions of introducing a new DC superhero or DC inspired superhero in season 3, it was like right as there was so much vitriol being thrown from our president and, people who love him towards Muslims. And it was so hateful and so awful. And here we were like talking about like introducing a new superhero. And I just remember talking to Mark Guggenheim and I was like, Mark, this superhero needs to be Muslim. Like, we need to have that on our TV screens. And he was like 100%. He was like, I 100% agree with you. And he really wanted it to be this character from the Black Adam universe called Isis. And obviously we weren't going to call her Isis. So that's where Zari Tomaz came into the picture, because it was like, Mark's version of Isis without being Isis. And so he was like so determined for her to be Isis, but we could not ever call her that.
No.
And so
That was the limit. That was one thing that you
that was the limit. And but I was a little annoyed because I didn't really want her to, like, it was weird that she was Iranian, but she had this last name Tomaz. I was like, what is going on here? Right. And that's why we ended up, retrofitting that she had to change her name once all the the anti-religious propaganda came in her awful future.
Yes.
She could not have been Zari Tarazi because she would have automatically had a target. So we just were like, the family changed their name in this awful timeline. And that's why she is Zari Tomaz in that timeline. However, when we go back into Hey World, change it. Now she gets to be Zari Tarazi forever. And that was like our way of being like, now she has a proper Iranian family name, and like everything's good now.
Problem solved.
Problem solved.
And now we have two Zaris, and what do we do now?
Yes, now we have two Zaris, and we love them both so much that we can't get rid of one or the other.
I know. So good. Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
This is so cool. And we're, like I said, me and the fans, I want to speak for all the fans, but we're very grateful for you and for everyone who was making this show. And it's the best. And I'm so glad that now we have it, and we can go back to it like over and over again. And yeah, it was really cool to hear from you. I was like,
happy to talk about it. And also really grateful for you guys, to you, all the fans who've been so loving and supportive of us throughout the show's run, but especially now. And it's the sort of wake of its passing. It's just seeing how much it meant to you. It means a lot to us that, the very long hours and the hard work and the, putting the axe to the grind for all these years, that it paid off, and that that if these stories, have touched a lot of people, that makes what we do worth it. And I never want to make a show that people are just like, man, it was fun. I always want to make a show that gives people joy and makes them feel seen and heard and loved. And that brings people together, people who are very different. And that's what we want to do. We want to
legend, I think.
Joyful programming that challenges, but also, moves, and hopefully creates more empathy in the world. That's what we want.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you, Keto. It was really nice to meet you, and thanks for answering questions. There was still a lot that I didn't ask, but
no worries.
I think this was perfect.
Okay, good.
So,
have a wonderful evening, right? It's night there? Yeah.
It is almost 10 p.m.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, get some sleep.
I will get some sleep. I hope you have a good day, and maybe I'll see you again one day.
I hope so.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, Keto.